Get my 6. Actually out here telling this story this morning. I don't know if you can tell by the lighting or my groggy eyes. For a couple of reasons. It's a beautiful morning. Got a lot on my plate today, a lot of stuff to do around here. So I want to get at it quickly, but mainly because I want to make sure I tell this story while it's still fresh in my mind. It's a super creepy story. Anybody out there who collects dolls or doll houses or knows somebody that does, you might drop your hobby after hearing this, because the lady that told me the story, she sure did. So today's video, by the way, is sponsored by Dearly's Kitchen, authentic Filipino food. So I'm gonna be munching on some peanuts as I tell this story. Oh, I love it how she leaves these big chunks of real garlic in there when she cooks them. That crunchy garlic is just as good as the peanuts. And before I forget, upon request, Miss Dearly is now shipping smaller orders, 55 pieces of lumpia, for smaller costs, of course, as well, to many of the folks who want to try the lumpia but can't get the big bags. You can now get all this delicious food from our Etsy store. Links in the description box below. So, what is it that can be so creepy about old dolls and old doll houses that might make any collectors out there stop collecting? And did I mention to keep your eyes on the background behind me, because we never know who or what may or may not show up to hear some of these creepy stories. All right, so I was fully prepared to give the lady that shared this story with me a shout out so everybody could know her name at least, and she didn't want that because she's a professional. She works here in Charlottesville. I'm not even going to say what she does, but she is concerned that if people knew she believed this kind of stuff happened, that it might hurt her professionally. And I can understand. When you start talking about Bigfoot, Sasquatch, paranormal, supernatural, all this kind of stuff, people will write you off as cuckoo for Cocoa Pops, right? But it's interesting how everybody has a story. They'll laugh at you like she did. This lady, she's an acquaintance. She's not really a friend. Our kids end up doing like activities outside of school together a couple times a year. You know, maybe one season they're playing soccer together. Then we don't see them for a year. Then the next year they're on the same flag football team. Something to that effect, okay? Without giving it away. Because when I said, hey, I want to give you, she's like, no, do not tell them who I am, because okay, so anyway, here's the story. It was maybe 9 months or so or something. Our kids were doing something together, and they had been for a couple of years by that time, so we became more open with each other, me and her husband and my wife, while we were all there watching the kids do stuff. And it came up, you know, what do you guys do? And we said, well, you know, we do our own thing from home. We work from home. We're always vague about it because we always know the response we're going to get. What do you do? Why you tell them I'm a writer? No, seriously, what do you do? Okay, well, I write. And then the YouTube thing comes up, and they laugh at that too. And they go, no, seriously, you're right. You do YouTube. Like, I'm not asking your hobbies. What's your job? And then you explain, well, I mean, that kind of, it still dumbfounds me, but I guess I'm a Gen Xer. And I guess most of my generation were past the age of really getting on board with social media and stuff. A lot of people just don't understand, you know, that you can do this as your gig, your primary gig. Well, I hadn't seen this woman. We hadn't seen her for probably 9 months since that conversation took place, until recently. Our kids are doing the same thing again. She's like, OMG, my son, so-and-so, told me about your channel, so I went and I watched it. You guys are for real. You actually have like a lot of subscribers, and you get, I'm like, yeah, I mean, I wasn't lying to you. I mean, any more than when you told me you were whatever. I used to make videos about that. I'm like, it's nothing funny about being a, you know, well, I can't say what, I don't know, a teacher or a clerk at a bank or managing the local grocery store. But by God, if you're a YouTuber, no, seriously, what do you do? All right. I've beaten that horse enough. So she told me that she watched some of our videos. She said at first she wanted to just kind of watch one to see what we were about and what we did. But she got into the, there's a playlist on this channel. Well, that sounded like a loud, ferocious tree knock, did it not? Anyway, there's a playlist on the channel called October Nights. And that's where I made videos where I read every story from the book October Nights, 31 Tales for the Halloween Season. Part 1. Hint, hint, wink, wink. Okay, so she got into those. She got into those, and she said she couldn't stop watching. She's gone back and listened to a couple of her favorites more than once. She loves ghost stories. Again, like I said, everybody will laugh at you first at the mention of them, but everybody's got their own, and lo and behold, she had hers. And she said, you know, I can tell this too if you don't mind hearing it. I said, I don't mind hearing it. I love hearing it, but I would like to, if it's good, I'd like to be able to retell it. Don't mind, you know, saying it came from you. And this is where she said, well, you can retell it, but don't tell them that it came from me because I don't want them to know. So she's not from Virginia. She's from somewhere up in the Northeast, like a lot of folks who live in Charlottesville. And she said when she was a little girl, she loved dolls, she loved doll houses, and she got into collecting them. That was just her thing. And she said that her and her parents, they loved to go, you know, if they were on vacation or if they were taking trips, if they saw one of those old roadside antique shops or thrift stores, they would always stop and they would look to see if there were any old dolls or any old doll houses. So they were out once and they were driving through a neighboring community, not the town she grew up in, but the next town over. It was summer break from school, and they found one of these antique stores, and so they go in and they start looking around. And the proprietor comes over, and he asks, is there anything specific that you're looking for that I can help you find? And her father, who was with her, said, well, yeah, my daughter collects dolls and doll houses. Do you have any doll houses or any antique dolls here in your shop? And the lady said that she could see this look of fear come over the man's face. And he told him, he said, no. He says, I had one dollhouse one time and I will never carry another. And he said, I wouldn't recommend anybody having such a hobby. And she was 12 years old. And at 12 years old, I mean, she could look back and remember 12 years old thinking, OMG, you know, this is before OMG was even invented. What could this guy be talking about? And her dad laughed and said, oh, come on. What's so wrong about dollhouses and collecting dollhouses? And he looked down at her, and she could tell that he didn't want to tell this story in front of her because of her youth. She was only 12. And he just said that he had a bad experience with the dollhouse once, and he doesn't deal with dollhouses anymore. But if they wanted anything else, let him know. So they kept browsing and looking around through his shop, seeing if there was anything of interest, but there wasn't. They didn't buy anything. But she said she never got over that. She always remembered that, and she always wondered what was it about this dollhouse. Well, fast forward. I heard another tree knock. You know, it is spring, typically mating season. That was a bird. Have I mentioned how delicious my wife's peanuts are? And you can get them from our Etsy store. Link is in the description box below. So, fast forward. She grows up. She goes off to college. She attends college 2 towns over. So she has to pass through this town where they'd stopped at that antique shop and had that experience. And when they asked the guy about the dollhouse to get to where she was going to college. Well, she stopped by there one day to talk to the owner. She wasn't even sure if he'd still be there or not because he is old already. When she was 12 years old and she went in there the first time. But sure enough, he was in there, and he comes up to her and he says, "Hello, young lady. Do you need help finding anything?" And she says, "Do you remember me?" He looks at her and he goes, "No." And she says, "I was in here 6 or 8 years ago. I was a 12-year-old little girl, and me and my father were looking for dollhouses, antique dollhouses." And she said, at the mention of the word dollhouse, that same look of fear came over his face. His whole countenance changed, just as it had when she had been there years ago. And he says, "Yes, I do remember." He says, "You're all grown up now." He goes, "Nope, still don't have any dollhouses, but if there's anything else you need, let me know and I'll help you find it." And he turned around almost as if he was trying to run away from her. He starts walking real fast. So she walks up, she catches up to him. She goes, "No, no, no. Wait, I want to hear the story." She said, "I could tell when I was a little girl that something had happened with the dollhouse. You didn't want to say it." She said, "I got the feeling that you were being respectful for me and my youth, and I appreciate that." She says, "But I'm a woman now. I attend college over here to State College in the next town over. I'm actually on my way back, after being home for the weekend. Curiosity has been killing me for the last half a dozen or 8 years. What is the story?" So he tells her. So the story is this. The man had that antique shop for years. It actually had belonged to his parents. He got into the family business as a young man, took it over when his parents passed on. He said that one day, many years ago, all right, this is creepy. Did anybody just see something pass from here to here? I thought it was a deer. I, honest to God, thought it was a deer, but I turned around and there's nothing there. And you notice how it got really quiet right here in this immediate area? Okay, so one day, years ago, before this lady, the center of our story here, was even born, this guy shows up at the antique shop, and there's this antique looking dollhouse on the porch, just sitting there. And he said a lot of times people would come by and they drop stuff off, because he used to sell stuff on consignment. He said he got out of doing that because he just didn't like dealing with so many people. But they'd leave stuff and they'd say, "Hey, I want this much for it. If you can sell it for more than that, you keep the difference," whatever. But there was no note on this dollhouse, no tags, no indication whatsoever who it belonged to or how it got there. But he said the weird thing about it was that the house looked familiar. Even though it was a dollhouse, it looked like a small version of a real house he had seen somewhere. He just couldn't place it. So he left the dollhouse on the porch originally. He hurried into the shop because he had so many things to do. Had to get the shop open. And he pretty much forgot about the dollhouse until the end of the day, when he was leaving the shop, going home, and he thought, well, I'm going to take it home, make sure it opens up properly, all the doors work, everything works correctly, see what type of material it's made out of, to try to determine what a fair market value of this old dollhouse might be, should he, not hear from anybody and actually just put it in his store for sale or whatever. And if he were to sell it, he'd hold the money, of course, until whoever left it came by for a reasonable amount of time. But it was a great mystery of how it got there in the first place. But he ends up taking it home, puts it in his bedroom on his desk, and he's messing around with it, and he sees there's like two little old people in it, like two little figurines, like old people in a bedroom. Leaves the dollhouse open after his inspection, reads for a little bit, and goes to bed. So at some point in the middle of the night, he just happens to wake up. He wakes up and he feels as if he's fully awake. And he notices that there's a glare coming from from the dollhouse. So he sits up in bed and he looks over, and it's as if there are lights on in the house. And he sees the two little figurines, and it's like, if you remember television prior to like 1950 or something, even married couples never slept in the same bed together because it was considered too risque. And then when they did start sleeping in the same, they both bed, I don't know if you knew this is television history here. They both had to have one leg visible up above, need to work on my flexibility, above the blankets. So like if the husband was on this side, his left leg would be up over the blankets. If the wife was on this side, her right leg would be up over the blanket. That's so the viewers wouldn't think, anything was going on underneath those covers. It wasn't. So it was just like that. The two little figurines were in separate beds. And he was looking, he's like, he's thinking, I don't even remember seeing any lights in that house. And I certainly didn't plug anything in. How could this be? But he knew he was awake. Clearly a very loud tree knock back there. This is creepy, hearing these tree knocks and knowing where this story's going. Okay, so he sits up a little more and he looks and he notices as he does that those figurines seem to roll over. And he's like rubbing his eyes. I know I'm awake. This can't be real. But then as he's watching, you remember he had left it open? He could see where the front door on the house opens and another figurine walks in, and this figurine is wearing a ski mask and it's carrying a knife, and it comes in, and he had not seen this third figurine, and it walks up the stairs. It goes upstairs and it goes into the bedroom to where the other two figurines are sleeping. And oh my goodness, listen, if you're out and about, watch out for these suckers. There's a tick. Felt something crawling around on my leg, and that's the culprit right there. Let me tell you, I had 2 or 3 of these things on me yesterday. Always make sure to check, okay? So the figurine that had come in the door and walked upstairs stabbed these other figurines to death. And then it went to a dresser, went down to the bottom drawer, and took like a sack of something. And just as creepy as it had come in, it crept down the stairs back out the front door. And the guy's like pinching himself. There's no way this is a dream. I know I'm awake. He gets out of bed and he goes over and he's looking for that third figurine, but it's nowhere to be seen. And he picks up the other 2 figurines and they're bloody. They have blood on them. He's like, what in the devil? What kind of hocus pocus black magic crap is this? He grabs this dollhouse and he goes outside and he pours lighter fluid all over it and he lights it on fire and he just burns it to ash. Burns it to ash. And so he's telling this story to this girl who's now a college student, and she's listening, like looking at him like, wow, this story is crazy. It's unbelievable. And he says what's even more unbelievable than that is about a year after that, he finally had this big aha moment when he remembered at the beginning of the story, I told you, he thought that house looks like a house I've seen before. He remembered where that house was. It was way out in the country, heading in the, where the girl lived was here, that town was here, she went to college over here, it was in a community up this way. He said, that's where I've seen that house. It's this old country back road. There's not a whole lot of people living out there, but that's where I'd seen that house. The house looked just like that, but it's a real big house. So he decided he would drive out there one day. And he did, because he just wanted to poke around and see if that house was there and how much it did resemble the dollhouse that mysteriously had shown up on his business's porch, where this murder of these little figurines took place. The house, the dollhouse that he burned in his front yard after seeing this. Because he felt he was dealing with the devil, or somebody who worshipped Mr. Beelzebub. So he goes out in the country. He goes to where he remembered seeing that house, and the house isn't there. There's no house there whatsoever. But what is there is the charred remains of that house from where the house had burned to the ground. So he stops, he parks, he gets out, and he's looking around. Looks like it'd been burned down some time ago, at least a year. Well, there was a neighbor from across the road, saw him over there. He just comes walking over, asks him how he's doing. He says, oh, I'm fine. He says, remember there used to be this really old house standing here, and I haven't been through here in the longest time, and I came by and I see that it burned down now. What happened here? And the guy had come over from across the road said, oh, it's terrible, terrible what happened here. You didn't hear? He goes, well, no, because I live down, next town down. I didn't hear anything. What was it that happened? And the neighbor told him, he said, the nicest old couple for years lived there. Never bothered anybody. Their kids were grown and gone. They were in their 80s, I guess. Said one night they were robbed. Somebody just came into the house, stabbed them to death, killed them, and like a lot of these would have been World War II generation folks. A lot of those folks, I mean, most of them are passed on now, but man, they kept tens of thousands of dollars in dresser drawers because they didn't feel safe. They grew up in the Depression. They knew what it was like to really be poor and not have a safety net of assistance where you go sign up for stuff and live better than people that work 60 hours a week. Someone came in, killed them in their sleep or while they were sleeping, and took cash out of the dresser drawer. Never found out who it was. And the guy that owned the antique shop he felt his veins run cold, almost as if, you might have found out who was actually haunting your homestead. Boy, that was a creepy story, wasn't it? Go watch that if you haven't seen it. His veins run cold when he finds out who's finally been haunting the homestead, all these, whatever. The guy says, yeah, but he says, so nobody was living here. Their kids were all out of state. They came back for the funeral to make those arrangements, got what they wanted out of the house, but then they left, put it on the market. Nobody was even interested. No offers were coming in because we're so far out here in the country, not close to anything. But then somehow it just burned to the ground. It just almost as if somebody had poured lighter fluid all over it and lit it. Nobody knows how the fire started. So the guy that runs the antique shop looks at this neighbor and he says, well, how long ago was the fire? He says, about a year ago. And it had been about a year since the guy had discovered this dollhouse on his porch, taken it outside and burned it after seeing what happened with those figurines. So, lady, whose name I've been asked not to mention because, shoot, if people knew she believed in such things as that, they might not go there to get their teeth cleaned anymore. Mum's the word. Buy my wife's peanuts and lumpia from our Etsy store. Links in the description box below. Let's see if I can get out here and find out what's been making these creepy tree knots. See you next time. Here, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Sasquatch. Here, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Sasquatch, Bigfoot, Sasquatch.